In the current landscape of MMOs, both new and old, games are constantly fighting for your time and money, with very few being worth both. But then there's Guild Wars 2, a game with no advertisements, no mainstream coverage, and won't be able to drink for the next 10 years. I feel like most gamers have heard of it, but assume that it was a dead game because they weren't already in its little bubble, and I wouldn't blame you. But that's far from the truth. It's got a thriving and dedicated player base, and it even got a new expansion just a few weeks ago. And it's not hard to see why. There's a reason this game has been kicking for so long. Great combat, decent story, just an overall fun gameplay loop. Now, if you're someone who is new to MMOs and is stunned by the sheer amount of them and you don't know where to start, honestly, ArenaNet's Guild Wars 2 is hands down the best first MMO for anyone looking to get into the space. It doesn't overcomplicate things at the start. The combat is a mix of action and tab target, and an action cam option if you want a more straightforward targeting scheme. It's got a large story that you don't have to interact with if you don't have to, dozens of densely packed zones, good raids and dungeons, great player versus player content, and it's all absolutely risk-free to try with no time limit. Free to play with no subscription and a moderate file size. And it could also probably run on dirt if you tried. So if you came here just to see if it was a good first MMO, then yes, Guild Wars 2 is it. And this is coming from someone who doesn't consider this their main game. So if you haven't started already, download Guild Wars. It's available on Steam and has its own standalone launcher, but if you're still on the ropes about it, then keep watching the video. So upon starting, you get to select or make a new character. You have 5 slots, which will become a problem later, but for now, we get to engage with the character creation, and it's fine. For races, you have 2 humans, a plant, a goblin, and the Hunchback of Notre Meow. And for those of you who think I'm punching down, no. Guild Wars 1 had straight back char, and I will continue to complain till they bring back good back posture. And can I just say, this artwork, this art style is great. It's definitely messy on the lines, but it's so distinct and works nicely with the rest of the game's watercolor art style. But continuing on, there are 9 classes ranging from the good ones and everything else. Honestly, all these are fun in their own rights, with tons of ways to build them. My only recommendation is to steer clear of Elementalist and Engineer if you're new to this sort of game, as these two can get a bit complicated pretty early on and it might feel a little bit overwhelming. The rest of character creation has a handful of sliders and other options. Answer a few questions about your character's past, give it a name, and then cutscene. Voiced cutscene too. Yeah, about 60% of this game is voiced. Even your own character talks. Yeah, stick at all those mostly silent protagonists. The first area you're in will be an instance. Follow the marker, beat a mini-boss, and then you're just free. Once you're dropped into the world, you can go and do whatever you want. If I can give anything to this game, it'll be just how easy and fast the leveling process is. There's so many ways to do it. And if you get bored with world quests, go do dungeons or story missions or PvP, because that rewards you with books that boost you up a level. The whole game is super toon friendly, so you can have all the characters that you want. And all of this is wrapped together with the main thing that you'll be engaging with, the combat. Now, the best way that I can describe the combat as a whole would be confused, but like in the best way possible. MMOs typically go for tab target or action, but Guild Wars took both of them and ran with it. By default, the game is tab target, but it also has hitboxes, dodging, projectiles, and a universal cleave. And if you don't want any of the tab targeting nonsense, then there is an action cam that does a pretty good job of masking it. Honestly, I prefer hybrid combat over really any other. Solely tab target runs the risk of making you stare at your hotbar more than anything else on the screen, and action combat can make simple things feel more complicated than they need to be. That, or encouraging basic attack spam. There's just a very unique flow to combat in Guild Wars. Whether or not you miss an ability isn't up to random chance, because when you miss, you deserve to miss. The game lets you miss. I know this may seem like an odd thing to focus on specifically, but you're never going to hear a voice line saying,
I require a target. I need to target something. I don't have a target. I don't have a target.
There's also universal cleave. So if there's 2 enemies in front of you, it doesn't matter which one you have targeted. If you're within range, both are getting hit, which makes dealing with groups and pairs of enemies incredibly fun, and this applies to every melee weapon in the game. Ranged will only hit one target, but a few weapons will let them bounce between enemies. This game definitely leans more into melee as a whole. Even as a ranger or caster, it's generally more effective to be up in everyone's business, especially in raids since team buffs stack. So often during the damage phase of a fight, everyone's gonna just merge into this blob of gamer rage. Biblically accurate MMO angel. There's also dodging. This is admittedly not very useful until later in the game, as for the first 20 to 30 levels, nothing really gets dangerous, but once you're at a certain point, you better get out of those AoEs, because that's a fast way to have a bad time. You can even face tank some of the most powerful attacks, because dodge roll has invincibility frames. Insert Dark Souls here. Next, since we're on the topic of combat, I want you to take a look down here. See this? This is perfect. Listen, I will not lie to you and say that I don't get a massive level of satisfaction looking at 3 full hotbars of skills and understanding not only what each one does, but also when to use them, because I do. But even though I like feeling smart, it is way too complicated to look at, and oftentimes I find myself looking at this more than this, when this is usually the important part. Guild Wars just doesn't really have this issue. There are only 10 buttons here, with the left being your weapon skills and the right being everything else. Now, granted, this does get thrown out the window with some classes, like Weaver Elementalist, whose rotations that have 40,000 buttons and whose meta strat is to press all of them and pray the funny damage numbers go up. Oh yeah, did I mention there's weapon swapping? Because there is, and it's great. I love this. It once again just adds to the dynamic feel of the combat. Even if I like it, if this isn't your jam, there are a lot of builds and weapon types that just don't need you to swap off them for anything or to be effective. And while all of the weapon skills would make for an interesting game as a whole, there's also this whole other side. These are your more class and build specific buttons. Banners, shouts, buffs, debuffs, heals, and cleanses. You could very well find yourself overlooking these at times, but they are the nitty gritty of your playstyle, and I do recommend that you play around with them, and it's quite fun to do so. Now, take everything that I just said and multiply it by 2, because there is a second set of all of this, because there's underwater combat, which I absolutely love. But apparently that's the wrong opinion, because ArenaNet has done nothing with this idea past the base game. There is an entirely different set of weapons, movesets, enemies, and skills for underwater combat only. And listen, I get that water isn't everyone's favorite. Hell, even I get disoriented sometimes, but I mean, there's just so much more that could have been done with this idea that just never was given the chance to be realized. There are just so many cool zone ideas, challenges, dungeons, and puzzles that could have been here. Imagine a raid where your ship gets dragged into the ocean by the Kraken, and then you have to start chasing it down by diving into the depths. I don't know, maybe it's because I've been replaying Subnautica, but I wish more was done with this. But hey, if you dislike it, then rest easy, because there isn't a whole lot of it, so don't worry. This game is also very, very flexible when it comes to building your class and playstyle, but likewise, flexible within each class. The sword on one class will not act the same as a sword on the other, which is cool, not just because you get to see 5 different sets of cool animations for one weapon, but also if you don't like how a sword plays on one class, you could try to use it on another, see if that works better for you. However, I will say that most weapons just have a correct build and way to use them. They're either for power or condition damage, and there's very few who can act and do both. When you're picking gear and just generally leveling up, you'll be able to really start molding your character's playstyle to fit whatever role you want to fill, and how you want to go about dealing damage. This is definitely one of the highlights of Guild Wars, because building your character is actually a lot of fun. There are 5 trees with 3 elite specs for each class, and you get to pick a combination of 3 of them. And I find it quite fun, and it is a good thing that it is fun, because you're going to need to figure this out, because once you hit level 80, if you have a build with stats all over the place, Guild Wars 2 is going to kick your teeth in constantly. Because, believe it or not, Guild Wars 2 actually gets kinda hard in max level zones. And considering that those make up 80% of the whole map, you might want to consider getting rid of your I want a little bit of everything celestial crap, because you're going to need to get a real build. But if you need a quick lesson, here we go. Focus your build on power for big numbers, precision on critical numbers, condition for a flood of tiny numbers, and healing if you hate fun. But if you don't have fun, then here is Koji's official Guild Wars 2 how to have fun build guide. Step 1, pick warrior. Step 2, dual axes. Step 3, all of your gear stats into precision, and then spin to win, because that'll shred through everything and give off the unga bunga big numbers. Although I love the art style, I do feel bad for the Azura and Char players, as a pretty decent portion of the armor sets in the game just do not work when scaled and stretched into these wildly different models. It's clear that much of the game was made with the more human-shaped models in mind, although in the case of the Char specifically, some of the more cute vanity sets just look straight up ridiculous. I mean, like, come on, you can't put this in a maid dress. Although, in all fairness, many of the more gruff and serious sets look leagues better on the Char than the other races, as fashion as a whole is pretty hit or miss in this game. Even more so considering that the more specific desirable cosmetic items are locked behind the Black Line Trading Store. And on that note, let's look at the cash shop, because boy do I have some choice words for it, and, well, those choice words are actually mostly positive. First, I want to point something out. Look what happens when I open up the game. Whoa. Look, the game is the first thing I see, not the cash shop, not some hot deal going on. It's the game, which is weird to say in today's age. The shop itself is mostly cosmetics, weapons, armor, gliders, mounts, skins. And these are, for the most part, objectively nicer than most in-game items. But I'm not gonna hold this nearly to the same scrutiny as many other games, simply because you can turn gold into the premium currency, gems, at a rate that's actually quite feasible, especially since the game throws gold, or items that can be turned into gold, very frequently, from pretty much every type of activity there is. And it's not like you need to mega grind the most optimal path to get the decent amount of gold. I honestly love this, for the obvious reason of making gems a premium currency and not an explicitly paid one. But it also is good because it keeps the trading post prices in check, since gold is being taken out of the economy so often that it never inflates to a ridiculous degree, which is something that many MMOs often struggle with. However, despite the praise that I give this, there is another side to the monetization, and I'm gonna be less forgiving of it. Because depending on what you consider to be winning, Guild Wars 2 is technically pay to win. There is definitely a case to be had that they make the problem and then sell you the solution with boosters, build slots, bank space, and the worst of the bunch, character slots, which is a problem because of how toon-friendly the game is as a whole, as you're encouraged to have more than one character, and leveling is unbelievably fast. Level boosts are less of a problem in this game in my eyes because of the fast leveling, as well as the fact that doing pretty much everything gives you items that already boost you up a level. And just like how gold can be turned into gems, gems can also be turned into gold. Gold that can then be used to buy high-level gear at the player auction house. Now, I bring this up really just to leave no stone unturned, because in my honest opinion, this is completely fine. One, because nothing you pay for is going to be better than anything else that was earned. Two, it's a player-ran auction house. Everything in it was made or was gotten by another player. And three, and I personally see this as the biggest argument in favor of it, it cuts the market for outside gold selling to a fraction of what it would be. It doesn't matter what the game is, gold sellers will always be there. And with that always comes a risk. If real money trading is going to exist, I'd 100% rather it be between the player and the game, instead of leaving it up to chance. Honestly, I think the cash shop is fair. You can earn everything this game has to offer, and the only thing you have to pay for are the expansions. And even with some of the monetization not really being my favorite, I would definitely prefer this over a subscription or everything being locked behind a seasonal pass and such. Now, if you're still here, then maybe you should consider subscribing, maybe liking the video, sharing it to your friends, trying to convince them to play. But next, I want to touch on the actual world of Guild Wars 2, Tyria. And man, you guys were so close to making the perfect open world. It's big, it's dense, there's lots of enemy variety, and the world events are everywhere and constant and actually good. NPCs that talk to you, world bosses, jumping puzzle, and it actually looks really nice and is fun to roam around in. And then you had to go and screw it all up with loading screens. Listen, I know, I'm not stupid. I'm aware that it's probably just some technical limitation, but come on, you were so close to the perfect open world. To me, World of Warcraft has the most immersive open world because of the lack of loading screens. And it sucks because Guild Wars 2 did everything else right and better than everyone else. I mean, maybe they'll do a Cataclysm level event and make it all one big world. Maybe. I doubt it, but maybe. Now, the world of Tyria itself has a lot of storytelling, and it's enough. But anyone who's seen my videos before probably knows what I'm gonna go on about. Guild Wars 2 has a very long and varied main story that actually changes based on the race that you chose. It's got some cool set pieces and battles, but I straight up do not care. I have never cared about the stories in any MMO. I'm not here for a deep and compelling narrative. I'm here to fight bosses with my friends and occasionally commit crimes against the fashion industry. But for those who do care, here's a rundown. Dragons exist, and every 1,000 years that becomes a problem. They wake up, kill everything before getting bored and pissing off for a millennia. This is the dragon cycle. Kill a dragon in the base game, and then fight 2 more for 2 expansions before End of Dragons, where you end all the dragons. Go figure. And then SoDo comes out, the new expansion, where there are rifts in reality because for some reason, every MMO needs an alternate reality expansion. And all jokes aside, I actually really like how it's handled here. The story in itself, despite how little I care, is actually quite good from what I've played. And once you've reached max level, which doesn't take that long, you're free to skip around the story however you want. Want to skip all the way to Path of Fire for the mounts? Go ahead. Only want to play specific chapters of the Living Seasons? You can do that too. This is great because, I mean, I would be really angry if I had to play through the whole story of the game for every character that I made. It wouldn't be very fun. No, it wouldn't. Now, other than the story, most of the max level content will either be in world events, which once again are really good, but there's also dungeons, fractals, strikes, and raids. Now, just to point this out, max level does not mean endgame when it comes to Guild Wars 2. As I said before, most of Tyria is meant for level 80 characters. So what would be considered endgame content in other games is actually really accessible here. Of the 4 types that I mentioned, dungeons are probably the one that most people will understand going into. But Guild Wars actually flips these on their heads. Believe it or not, the dungeons are actually very few in number, especially when put next to other MMOs. But trust me when I say this, Guild Wars 2 takes an approach for their dungeons that vastly prioritized quality over quantity. And there are 2 big reasons for this. One is that they're actually really long and very well made, but also they're not meant to be played once. And I'm not just talking about difficulty options, I'm talking like the dungeons themselves have a contained story that will continue when you come back at a higher level, which means you'll get new enemies, new areas, and the areas that you do revisit are often different to show how something has changed in its own self-contained story. They aren't too challenging as a whole, and they're a quick way to level. Honestly, a lot of fun, and I think it's definitely the more slept-on activity in Guild Wars. Now, fractals, on the other hand, are dungeons cranked up to 11. Only accessible at level 80 with 4 tiers, these basically go through the same song and dance, run through some trash mobs, then a boss. However, these have a unique and ever-growing debuff called Agony, which damages a percentage of your health as well as reducing all healing and barriers by around 70%, which you can get up to 100 stacks of, and the only way to protect against it is with infusions and ascended or legendary gear. So basically any fractals over tier 1 will have a soft gear requirement, and don't think you can just ignore Agony with good awareness and dodging because every final area will have an Agony check that'll just give you a few stacks from the get-go. And on top of all of that, there's an additional level of pain that you can layer onto this with optional challenge modes, which adds another layer of crap to the whole thing. Basically, I'm saying that this is not an activity for the faint of heart. It's unbelievably unfair, and that's kind of the point. I don't recommend going into this with randoms. Now, for the majority of players, even from a casual level, strikes will be the main course of instance PvE content. Most consist of 2 rooms, the spawn, and the boss arena. No trash mobs, just a boss. Pretty much trials from Final Fantasy XIV. These are mostly fun. Not simple by any means, and if you're not paying attention, they will end you, and they will do so quickly, but not exclusively endgame by any means. They do, however, feature more optional challenge modes, which, unlike the regular ones, are strictly endgame and significantly more difficult than normal. I don't have a whole lot to say about strikes. The quality of them does vary from boss to boss, but I'd say as a whole, the pool of them is very solid. Now, when it comes to MMOs in general, most people will look at raids being the big important activity, the endgame, the reason why you're grinding. And all that is very true here, except that there hasn't been a new raid since Path of Fire, 5 years ago. Now, far be it for me to question the devs who actually know what they're doing, but I have a question, why? Listen, I know that the player base has generally favored strikes as they're much shorter and more compact, but like, come on, not even one for Ended Dragons or Secrets of the Obscure? I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I like raids. Would I choose the raids over the strikes? No, probably not in a million years. Raids take forever, but that's also kind of the reason why I like them. These big, long, planned events with bosses and trash mobs, and it's just kind of now left there to collect dust, which to me is a massive shame, since the raids are really good. Not Hall of Change though, let's just forget about that one, but the rest are good. And listen, I understand why they left raids alone, but I can also still be disappointed that we don't have any new ones. Those are the primary PvE instances. But there's also PvP, which I have quite a bit to say about. So here's the thing, I really like PvP as a concept. And in games as large as most MMOs, I want to be able to fight other players. But the truth is, most of them aren't really good. World of Warcraft is fine, but very gear dependent. ESO's is unapproachable, Final Fantasy's is straight up unplayable, and Destiny 2 is an FPS, but I mean, of course that's good. You can't really screw that up. So, flat out, right out the gate, I thought that this mode was trash, just completely unplayable. You're always stunned, the enemy is always healing, your attacks sometimes just do nothing, and it's just a spam fest with no tangible results. I was not having a good time. But for some reason, I kept playing. Did I have a premonition of what was to come, or am I just a masochist? I don't know. But at some point, it just clicked, and everything fell into place. Like most MMOs, PvP cannot be played the same way as the PvE content. Not only are you fighting real people, but they also have the exact same tools that you do, so you can't play focusing on DPS only. That's just how you become a pile of mush and sadness. Just remember, everyone has dodges, at least one heal, a negate skill, and the real game here is trying to bait out the opponent's skills while concealing yours. And after I learned that, and a little bit of build optimization, I was in pretty deep. I love the PvP in Guild Wars, like an unbelievable amount. There are 4 objectives: Conquest, which is holding points on the map, Murder Ball, which is stupid, TDM, which is self-explanatory, and Stronghold, which is if Dota was reasonable. Of the 4, Conquest is hands down the most common, which makes sense, but is honestly the reason why PvP is being held back so much. Stronghold as a game mode only has 1 map, Battle of Champions Dusk, and it's easily my favorite. You could single-handedly get more people to engage with PvP with this map alone, and here's why. Stronghold as a game mode is each team trying to take out the enemy's AI-controlled captain. There are also minions that occasionally show up and gates to destroy. Now, the reason why I want this mode specifically and more of it is because I do wholeheartedly believe that this could save PvP for new players. PvP is hard, especially since it ignores most of the instinct that players would have gained from PvE content up to this point, but Stronghold blends both of the elements very well and could ease players into how PvP is supposed to be played. That, and also raiding the enemy base, is pretty cool. Now, as a whole, there are two types of PvP. Structured 5v5, which is what I was just talking about, and world versus world, which only recently had gotten more attention from ArenaNet. These are big, massive maps with 3 factions battling for forts, holds, and points of interest. And I'm gonna be honest, I only just recently got into this mode, as up until just a little bit ago, I'd only popped in occasionally to get vistas and wander aimlessly. But then I saw it. Chaos. So, you know that whole thing I just went on about, how skill and stuns and all that other jargon on PvP? Yeah, throw all of that out the window, because this is just all about that sweet, sweet spam. At least, I think so. It's worked well enough for me. Raiding forts is honestly just a massive cluster of players bulldozing through AI guards, and there's also ballistas and catapults that break through walls. But no need to pay any attention to those, someone else will probably take care of it. I quite love this mode, not because it's engaging to play, because it's not, you literally just press the button at the enemy color, do damage, get shiny thing, but the spectacle of all of it is truly something to behold, and not something that the rest of the game can replicate. I don't have too much more to say about the mode, since at a casual level, it 100% can just boil down to running and spamming in a group. But I will say that it is incredibly annoying that you're likely not going to be able to play with your friends because of how this game handles servers. So when you make an account, you have to choose a world, which is not important. Everyone is pretty much on one big mega server. So to most people and to most activities, this choice is completely irrelevant and can be ignored. However, it does matter for what faction you fight for in World v World. This wouldn't be annoying if you could just swap worlds on a whim, but if you meet your friends from anything outside of this mode, chances are you're not going to be on the same team and they can't be played with, which honestly is something super small and not important. You'll usually find a cluster of players pretty easily once you get into the arenas for it, but the fact that I can't play with my friends is largely the reason why I ignored this mode until now. Now to the reason why I'm making this video. Guild Wars 2: Secrets of the Obscure. The dumbest name for an expansion I have ever heard. I mean, it sounds cool, yeah, but the acronym is SoDo. Now, compared to the existing 3 expansions, SoDo is actually quite small in comparison, and ArenaNet seems that they want to be able to make these more frequent, smaller expansions rather than these super spaced out big ones, which in most games I would consider to be a fairly bad idea, but considering how open-ended Guild Wars is structured as a game, I think that this is the right move going forward. End of Dragons to me felt like a definitive end to the main story of Guild Wars. The main conflict with the dragons had now been eliminated, so I was curious to see where they would take it. And the direction they took it was fractured versions of existing areas. One of the main zones is a collection of floating islands, each with a distinct theme. There's also the Wizard Tower being the new social hub, and a main TS? This is a dumb name, but the area itself actually reminds me a lot of Greece. Plus, there are more zones to come through patches. Now, I didn't finish the story because didn't read too long, and once I unlocked all 3 areas, I largely ignored it, as I normally do. I just don't care. Plus, even if I did, I probably would have gotten distracted, because this expansion, hands down, has the best meta world event of the whole game, and it's not even a contest. You have to close these little fractures in reality with your sky scale to push back this big Lovecraftian tentacle monster. Oh yeah, you might have caught that. I did mention a sky scale, didn't I? Cause you get one now. At first, all you get is a rental one for as long as you're in the new areas, but there's now a second method of unlocking it permanently, which doesn't require the living seasons. It is still long and complicated with some wild grinds, but the fact that there's now 2 ways to unlock it does make the whole thing a lot more accessible. Speaking of things that got better, they added a battle pass, but free and open-ended, and, like, good. The Wizard Vault is a list of objectives that give points, which you can then redeem for tons of rewards, which includes mount skins, which previously were restricted to the gem store strictly. I really like this inclusion, especially since it solves one of the many problems that I personally run into this game way too often, and that's logging on and just not really knowing what I want to do. So having a small list of objectives, especially ones that are quite easy to just go and do, that all add to one goal is really nice to have. And that's about all I have to say about the new expansion in its current state. 2 new strikes were added. I quite enjoy them, although none of them are my favorite. Still new raids, which, there's still patches. Here's hoping they bring that back. But now I want to focus on something a little different. The progression of Guild Wars as a whole. Now, in MMOs, there are typically 2 types of progressions, vertical and horizontal. Vertical progression is like World of Warcraft. A new expansion comes out, new gear, new level cap, everything goes up, including the damage numbers and health, all that stuff. You get objectively more powerful. Horizontal progression, on the other hand, once you hit the game's max, there's no higher to go, and all the stuff that you're doing is side stuff. In Guild Wars 2, for example, I would consider this to be true horizontal progression. If you played at launch and you got Ascended or Legendary gear, none of the new stuff that was added will be objectively more powerful than what you had at the base game. That's what horizontal progression is, and in theory, it's perfect, because it doesn't punish you for taking a break from the game. There's no meta to keep up with stats-wise. But here's the thing, and I think Guild Wars 2 runs into this, at least for me personally. I have nothing to work for. More accurately, there's so much stuff in Guild Wars 2 to work for that there's no centralized way to go about doing it. It's a little hard to describe, but when I log on to Guild Wars 2, I'm not exactly sure what I should be working for. I mean, I already have a little bit of Ascended gear, but it's not like there's anything past that. Yeah, sure, I could go and grind PvP or World v World to get gold, but why would I get gold? To go and craft more gear? But I already have the best gear. It's this weird repeating cycle. And if you're me, I don't really care a whole lot about the fashion in this game. What I personally have been grinding for is leveling up my crafting jobs and all my tunes. But what am I going to do once I get to that point? This is a massive downside to horizontal progression, but to some it's actually a positive, as I 100% relate to not wanting to go on the gear hamster wheel that some other games will constantly have you going on. And I hate to end this video on negative notes, but some of this does need to be said. On a technical level, this game is a palace with a drawbridge that's held together with tape and spit. While the game itself is relatively polished and bug-free, with the exception of optimization in some of the newer areas, in my many hundreds of hours of playtime, the amount of times that I had to get a master's degree in computer engineering just to get the game past the launcher is more than I can count on one hand. Verifying files, reinstalling, launching as admin does nothing. Sometimes the problem is the one add-on that I have, which I have to delete to make work, but the source file for the add-on isn't in the add-ons folder, nor is it named the same as the add-on. After getting rid of it, the game worked fine. But it also worked fine when I controlled Z to get the add-on back. I have no idea what's causing this issue, and sometimes the problem exists when there are no add-ons or anything. Now, do take this little bit with a grain of salt, as all of my friends that I've asked who also play have never had a problem with add-ons or anything relating to launching the game. With that small rant aside, I like Guild Wars 2, and I'm really happy that it got an expansion and has plans to keep these small add-ons going. I'm glad that ArenaNet has finally decided to put more resources into the game. Now the question is, should you play Guild Wars 2? Yes. Should you return to Guild Wars 2 if you've stepped away for years? Also yes. Should you play this game instead of Destiny 2? Well, I mean, I don't need to answer that. I think you already know that. I really like Guild Wars 2. It's a free game. I think everyone should give it a try. It's not dead. The game isn't dead. Trust me, I have no idea why there are no advertisements for this game whatsoever. I had not heard of it until I saw someone else playing it. Or Josh Strife Hayes. I'm pretty sure Josh Strife Hayes is like the whole reason why this game is still up and kicking. That guy is their whole marketing department, I swear. On that note, this is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. As you can see, it is like a 40-minute long video. I'm so sorry it took me so long to make this. It was an absolute undertaking, and I really hope that you guys enjoyed it. That being said, please subscribe, like the video, because I think you owe me that much. I mean, come on, I just stole 40 minutes of your day. And please let me know in the comments what you think of the game, especially the new expansion. I've seen a bit of divisiveness with how it's being received. I like it, although I also, most of my game time goes into PvP, so I'm not exactly interacting with the new expansion content all that much. I do wish they'd add more PvP maps, you know, Stronghold, the fun one. But yeah, this is the end of the video. Thank you for watching, and go away. And while you do that, I am gonna go and train some squirrels to be Power Rangers.